Thanks very much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's really great to see a good number of people, considering it's so wet outside. I thought I might be speaking to maybe just a few people, so thank you so much. I'm actually going to start by telling you a little bit about ourselves as gallerists and imparting a little bit of personal information. And if I can get my slide to disappear, we'll start. Is it just the down and the... Yeah, that's it, I've got it. Yeah. By the end of tonight, I'm hoping that you'll leave with a little bit of spark, and that you'll also leave with a sense of the bigger picture as photographers and how you engage with galleries, how you can move your work forward, and give you a sense of, from our perspective as dealers, the things that we consider and the way in which we operate. Now, Jaime's been very kind to impart a fair amount of biographical information about me, but there is another partner at the gallery who is Ching. He's also my husband, and he's also the creative director for the Photo District News magazine. And what he brings to the gallery is a lot of knowledge about contemporary photography. His finger's very much on the pulse with what's coming up, who's shooting what. Probably more so than myself, in fact. I come from a rather more cerebral position, and so we balance each other out very well indeed, and we often find ourselves at opposite ends of the spectrum and meeting somewhere in the middle when we're looking at photography and considering photographers that we might want to work with. As with a lot of gallerists that are working in the industry, we are very passionate about photography. In fact, we find photography to be really magical. There's nothing better than coming across a photograph that you think is so wonderful that it takes your breath away. And although that doesn't always happen very often, it's just so brilliant when it does. And so I'm going to start the evening just by sharing with you some of the photographs that we actually have in our own collection, and tell you a little bit about each one and why we have them and why we're so passionate about them. This is a portrait of Ouija. It's a photograph shot by a British photographer called Richard Sadler. And Richard Sadler is someone that I met even prior to attending university, and was one of the people who actually was responsible for me having the confidence to go to university and study photography. I had known Ouija's work, but I never knew what he looked like until I saw this photograph, which was shown to me by Richard himself. The photograph was shot in 1963, and the print itself is from the early 1970s. It was a gift, and I have no idea what its monetary value is. That doesn't matter, because it's an image that is very likely to ever be parted with. Another image in our collection is, again, important for a very personal reason. This is a photograph by another British photographer called John Blakemore. He's a renowned landscape photographer and a master printer. And when I was a student, I had the very good fortune to study under him. And I remember this time, actually, when he was doing a printing workshop. And I was a mature student. Some of my younger colleagues decided to skip class. And so I had this wonderful opportunity of working with this wonderful photographer and an incredible printer, pretty much on a one-to-one basis for 3 days. And this is a photograph from his Stilled Gaze series. And if you look carefully at the photograph, you'll see that it's layered. It's actually shot on film. It's silver print. And he probably did between 15 or more exposures. Now today, it's not so difficult to create layers and create one image from multiple images, but just imagine doing those number of exposures onto a single frame of film. I mean, the reciprocity factor alone would do your head in. So So that has to be admired. The craftsmanship is incredible, and the photograph itself is just exquisite. The subject is actually a number of items that he found in his garden whilst he was excavating it. This is a photograph by the French photographer Magali Noguered, and it's a photograph from a series called Towing the Line. And this is an image that's quite remarkable because it's actually a series of portraits of quite old people. And what she focused on were the clothes that the old people were wearing. And she was really, at the time, her practice was concerned with how people's clothing identify them as a generation of people. And the woman who's actually in this photograph is, I believe, in her 60s or 70s. And this is an outfit that she actually made by hand in the 1950s for a special date. So it's a wonderful image. This is a photograph by Laura Wolf. It's a recent acquisition that we made. And what's interesting about this photograph is that it really goes against the grain of what photography is. If we think about Walter Benjamin's seminal essay, The Work of Art in the Age of Reproduction, this totally throws away that viewpoint. It's a photogram working with colour paper. There's a certain amount of chance in its making, and it's a unique print. But the other thing that Laura does is she actually works on the emulsion of her photographs. So the lines that you see is where she's actually cut into the surface of the paper. We like it because it's unique. We love the colours, and yeah, you don't need to necessarily like much more. We actually also really want to invest as much as we can in our own artists, and we do buy our own artists' work when we can. And this is a photograph by the British photographer Elaine Dignan. It's an image that is part of her Micromundi series. It's a pigment print, and what the photograph is actually the meandering trails of where snails have eaten through algae. And the lighter coloured trails are the most recent biting marks that they've made. But what interested Elaine about this was how and why she has printed it in the circular format is because it also reminded her of planets, and she was thinking about micro worlds. So she was thinking about macro worlds and micro worlds. And by perchance, she actually shared this work with an astronaut called Leland Melvin, who was so entranced by the work and felt that there was some synergy between these images and his experiences as an astronaut, that he actually took one up in space and photographed it from the Mir space station. If you go to our blog, you can see a photograph of that. So that's pretty cool.
It might be the only artwork in space.
It was only there for a short time. It's back. And this is another of our artists. This is Helen Sear, and she's probably our most established artist. We're in fact doing a retrospective with her in the fall of 2012. This is from a series called Beyond the View, and the impetus behind this work was her really critiquing Northern European landscape painting and the position of the female figure in that. And she has turned the female figure so that her back is facing us, and the idea is that we are less likely to objectify her body. There's actually a lot going in the work, but another part of her work is concerned with the retinal aspect of art, not just on a visceral level, but also on a physical retinal level. So she's actually layered two photographs together. One is of a woman in a landscape, and the other is of a landscape. And she's erased one of the images so that you don't see either image completely. It's a beautiful photograph, and it's large as well. It's, I think it's 35 inches square. So the Klomp Ching, so that's a little insight into a few of our pieces in our collection. The Klomp Ching Gallery was actually launched in October 2007. It came about, although we're a young gallery, we have been engaged with photography for a long time and had thought for a period of time that we wanted to have a gallery. We are located in Dumbo, and we located there because the area is an area of urban regeneration. It's a great visitor destination. It's a really wonderful place to work. I can pop out of the gallery, go downstairs, have a coffee, and our visitors to the gallery as well have a lot of other things going on that make their visit to our gallery all the more enjoyable. The gallery has 1,358 square feet, of which 2/3 of that is dedicated to exhibition space. You'll see some images in a moment coming up. These are some images of the actual gallery space. We started with one artist, and our inaugural exhibition was work by Simon Roberts with his series Motherland, which, if you haven't looked at, I urge you to look at. It's a critically acclaimed project and has been highly successful. So these are some more images. We usually have around about six exhibitions a year, mostly solo exhibitions of our gallery artists, but we also do a number of group exhibitions as well. And we have had 2 exhibitions where we've worked with artists that we don't represent. So, shooting forward to today, 4 years later, we've moved on from one photographer to representing 17 gallery artists. And we also represent the work of 7 further print room artists. The main difference between the two is with the gallery artists, we represent them exclusively. We work with them very closely on more than just exhibiting their work and selling their work. We often liaise with them with the creation of new bodies of work and do a lot of other stuff, which I'm going to return to later on in the presentation. With the print room artists, we're representing normally just one body of work that we find very interesting. The contract that we have with these artists is generally a little looser than with our gallery artists. And this is an area of the gallery which is actually expanding, and you'll see if you return to our website that there'll be more artists appearing very shortly. So how do we find the artists that we work with? We attend a number of portfolio reviews, and I'm going to return to the subject of portfolio reviews shortly. We also attend photo festivals. It's a great way to see exhibitions that have been carefully curated and to view the work in a curatorial and a thoughtful context rather than perhaps just seeing a series of images online. It's always good for us to see actual objects. We deal with artifacts, and we always make an assessment of the quality of an artwork in terms of craftsmanship and how a body of work holds together. We judge a lot of competitions as well, and that's a really great way for us to see work that we would not normally come across. So we've juried a number of competitions, including Critical Mass, the Magenta Flash Forward. Recently, we were part of the jury for the Lens Culture International Exposure Awards, and we also have juried call-outs for open submission exhibitions, for example, at the Griffin Museum. The great thing about that is that quite often the work that's being submitted is being submitted as small bodies of work. So there'll be a selection of maybe 5 or 6 images or even up to 10 images from one body of work by each artist. So you get a good sense of how that project is shaping up. The challenge with that, though, is a lot of this judging is done online. So it's very difficult to determine what the work is actually like as a photograph. And saying that, I actually have a challenge coming up because I I'm the juror for the New Directions 2012 at the Wallspace Gallery in Santa Barbara. And I set the theme, and the theme is very much about form and content. And it's going to be a real challenge for me to really make those assessments based on digital files. So it'll be interesting to see how that one works out. I think it'll be a challenge. In that respect, I'll be actually relying on the artist statements to a good degree, and hoping that the descriptions of the photographs, the actual physicality of them, will be very clear. We also rely, well, we don't rely, but we certainly, what's the word for it, respect and are grateful for referrals from people that we trust. So occasionally someone will call us, or they'll drop an email and introduce us to the work of a photographer that they feel we should look at. That is something that we will take time out to address. Normally when we have submissions coming through on the email, they actually get put aside into a folder, and we have a lot of them. We get about 8 or 9 a day, and there's a top and a bottom, and we slowly work our way through. But if we get a referral from someone, then we'll look at it immediately.
Debra, so
Yeah.
Can someone do something to their email so you would look at it sooner?
No. No. No, the best thing to do is just follow our guidelines on our website, which is just send us a web address and we'll look at it. And then if we're interested, we'll seek more information. But I'll talk about that as well. And then also we obviously come into direct contact with people. Quite often that's in a social environment. We might be at an opening, someone will introduce themselves, we'll remember them, we'll have a card, and we'll take a look at what's on their website. Then there's the chance encounter, and I'm going to return to that later on because I have a great story. So I mentioned that I was going to return to review festivals. There's an awful lot of talk about review festivals, whether they're worthwhile attending, whether they're too expensive, and whether there are too many, and certainly there are a lot. Attending review festivals is actually one of our favourite ways of finding new photography and also meeting photographers. It really hits many boxes for us, and I'm going to go through that little checklist in a moment. But this is a list of the festivals that we have attended. Each of these review festivals has a really different personality. And I think what you need to do as a photographer, if you're considering attending, is look at what the format of the review festival is and determine whether that's the right festival for you. If you've never been, that's quite a challenge, I know. So for example, Review Santa Fe is a juried review. There's about 100 photographers who attend. It's a day and a half of reviews. It's very intimate, it's very friendly, and it's actually very relaxed. So it's a good one to attend if you've never been to one before and you've gotten your work has actually passed through the jurying process. Houston Photo Fest is a little bit on the other spectrum. It's almost like a beast, but it's a very exciting beast. They have 4 sessions of 4 days of reviews. In the 4-day period, there will be about 40-odd reviewers looking at people's portfolios. As a reviewer, we look at 56 portfolios in that 4-day period. It's exhausting, but it's terribly exciting as well, because you have, if you imagine there are 47 reviewers, imagine the number of photographers. I don't actually know the figure, but we're talking about hundreds of photographers. It's a great event. It can be a little intimidating if you've never been to a review before, because it can be a little fast-paced, and because of the numbers of people, you can feel like you're getting a little lost in the crowd. But it's an excellent event, and certainly if you have a completed body of work, if you're confident with it and you're articulate, then it's certainly an event that I would recommend. Another review that is a little bit different from Review Santa Fe and Houston Photo Fest are the one-day reviews that the Centre for Photography at Woodstock undertake. I believe they do them twice a year. They're one day. They have a small number of reviewers, and every photographer sees every reviewer that's in the room. So it's actually a gentler way in to showing your work and undertaking that process of sitting at a table in front of different people. So, and that's one that I would also look at closely if you want to kind of ease yourself into that process. The other thing that we've recently started to do are these things called Doctor's Hours, which is, again, it's their reviews with artists through the New York Foundation for the Arts, and they do those on a regular basis. That's been quite interesting because I did my first one last month, and I know photography, but I don't know sculpture or printmaking, and I actually found myself reviewing sculptors and painters. I reviewed a textile artist, and so it was a little bit outside of the comfort box, but it was fun. Okay, so when you do go to a review, I think that there seems to be, you know, Jaime, you were asking me what I thought the trends in photography are. And this is a trend. It's probably not quite what you were thinking of when you asked me that question. But this question is asked so often at these events. And it seems to me that there's a real emphasis and focus on a photographer wanting to have these three things, whether it's appropriate or not. And it's almost like this becomes the most important aspect of why they're at a review. And I like to remind people that what a review is. A review is about revision. And certainly the climate that we operate in at the moment, review festivals are certainly a platform for doing business, and it happens. And in fact, I should say that a good number of the artists that we actually represent, we did meet at review festivals. But it is also a really great context in a safe environment. And what I mean by safe is that people are there with good intentions to have your work put in front of someone and to get some really valuable feedback and some suggestions of how it might move forward, or if it's a completed body of work, what you do with it. So sometimes I think this comes way too early and the work is forgotten. At a review festival, generally you have 20 minutes in front of someone. So it's a bit like speed dating, but it certainly is speed networking. And the first impression that you make is actually really important. The reason why review festivals are one of our favourite ways to meet people and see new work is because we get to see the photographs, we get to meet the photographer, and we get to, if there's a good dynamic, we have an opportunity to network with them later. And in that 20 minutes, we can generally have a pretty decent conversation and get a sense of where someone's coming from and what their thoughts are behind their work, whether they're articulate, and where they're going, sometimes where they're going next, beyond what they're showing us. So the 20 minutes, there's not a lot that you can do in that, but it's the beginning of something that may turn into something. And I think it's really useful to think about it in that way. I mentioned speed networking. At the review festivals, you have your allotted number of reviews that you have booked and paid for. But outside of the formal reviews, there's often a lot of opportunities to network with people. So, for example, I get approached very often at these events where someone comes up to me and introduces themselves and they say, I didn't get to have a review with you, but I want to introduce myself. And so we introduce ourselves, we swap cards, and it's a really great way to make that first contact. It's also not only good in in the context of work, meeting publishers, picture editors, dealers, curators, people from museums, art consultants even, collectors. But it's also really important to meet fellow photographers, because what it does is it gives you an opportunity to see where your work sits with everyone else's. Because when we're looking at work, we're looking at a lot of people's work, and there's a lot of good photography out there. But as Bill Hunt says, actually, I'll steal his words, there isn't a lot of great work. So it gives you an opportunity to see where your work sits contextually within contemporary practice, within the context of that event. And I think that that can be really useful. A number of photographers who first meet at these events also forge relationships and continue to stay in contact and share feedback about each other's work. So it's very beneficial in that way. As I mentioned, you have 20 minutes. And the 20 minutes really needs to be used really carefully. You know, one of the saddest things that has happened to me at a festival was when someone sat down in front of me and they placed in front of me a blurb book. And I pushed it aside and I said, I'll look at that later. Can I have a look at your portfolio? And they pushed it back in front of me and they said, no, that's what I've brought. I had to actually say, well, you've just wasted 20 minutes of your own time and my time, because I can't make any judgments about your actual photographs, the actual physical photographs from this book. We can certainly go through the images and I can critique them, I can give you my thoughts about them, but I still don't know what the level of your craftsmanship is. I still don't know what the photographs actually look like. And putting something like that in front of an art dealer who deals with objects was very wasteful, and I was very saddened by that. Likewise, quite often I'm meeting photographers who will put a portfolio in front of me, and I'll be going through and I'll be looking at them and I'll be quizzing them about the paper. And they go, oh, no, 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 no. This isn't the paper that I print my work on, really. I just did this for the portfolio. Again, that's an opportunity that is lost. Why print work on paper that you're not actually planning to print it on and show it to me in some other form? That happens quite a lot. And the sad thing is, in relation to that, is when someone gets up and they leave and they want to give me some leave behinds, and the marketing material is incredible. It's slick, it's professional, and I wonder sometimes whether more investment has been made in the marketing material and the leave behinds than the actual portfolio. Because sometimes people tell me that they've not printed on their paper of choice because they can't afford to. But then they leave me this really swanky piece of PR. And I don't understand that imbalance. I think it's very good to have some marketing material, but not at the expense of your portfolio. I would rather someone even just get a post-it and write down their web address and their email, but have a really good portfolio. I actually prefer to just have a business card from someone with just their name, their email and web address, preferably with an image on one side that relates to what they've shown me, so I remember. But really, spending time on the portfolio is so crucial. The other element of the portfolio review festivals that's really interesting is, and a lot of them are doing them these days, is what's called the portfolio walkthrough. And in these situations, basically what happens is, as a photographer, you get given a space on a table and you have your portfolio out, and then the room is made open to the public. The reviewers will walk around and members of the public will walk around and look at the work. It's a really great way for reviewers to look at portfolios of people that aren't on our list of people we're actually getting the 20 minutes with. But it's also great for the photographer in that you're now presenting your work in a very different context. And the context is that you have members of the public who are going to come and look at your work, and they may not have any art knowledge, they may not know anything about photography, and they may be looking at photographs from a completely and utterly different perspective and ask you the strangest questions. It's a really great training ground to respond and to be able to talk about your work in a completely different way. The other people going around quite often, and this is certainly the case at the larger review festivals, are collectors and the patrons of those events who do walk around those rooms looking for work to purchase. Quite often they can be donors who then donate the work to museums. And so you never know quite who it is that's standing in front of you asking these odd questions. And I think it's in that respect, they're a very interesting part of the whole review circuit. But they have a downside as well. I mean, it's very frantic. People are often given a glass of wine to walk around with. So whilst it's important to have a portfolio of excellent quality, you can't feel precious about it because it's going to get thumbed, it's going to get dented, and that's just the way it is. I don't really think that it's very helpful for a photographer to carry to these events the large pieces. It's just on a practical level. You're going to be carrying something big and heavy. You're going to wear yourself out. You're going to get frazzled. You only have 20 minutes with someone, which includes laying your work out and packing it up. The tables are often not large enough. And also, you just have to remember that everyone who's reviewing are there because they're actually visually literate people. And we do understand how the nature of an image alters as a result of scale. So, you know, I actually think that anything up to 2024, not necessarily 2024, but somewhere in that region, is perfectly large enough. And we can easily translate that image to a different scale. If your work is particularly large, it can sometimes be helpful to print a portion of your image to scale so that someone can see what the detail is like. But that's probably not absolutely necessary. I hold wholeheartedly that if you're a fine artist and you want to sell your work, print the photographs up to the highest standard as if you were selling them. Just understand that in this context, they're going to get battered. Yeah, so don't sign them, don't edition them, but print them as if they were photographs you're selling. Yeah. Okay, so we've gone through a process of looking at people's work in magazines, blogs. We've been to review festivals, we receive submissions, we get referrals, we have chance encounters, we socialise. There's a lot of information about photographers that we actually collect. And what I've shown here is a screenshot, and it's blank because I don't want to share information, of our photographers database. So if we have an interest in someone, they end up in this database. And I'm actually a keen collector of data, mostly because I don't always have the best memory for people. I tend to remember images more than people. I like to remember where we've come across work. And even between the two of us, we meet so many people that we do keep a record. So you'll see the check boxes are basically an indicator of where we first come across the work. We have on the left the information about the photographer. In the notes, we'll have keywords. So for example, if we met someone at a review festival, we'll actually just put in what the review festival was and which year. Sometimes we meet people several times at different festivals, and we just put that into the notes. You'll see a really big square for the photograph. That's because we're about images. and we remember images. So we pull a key photograph that is the photograph that will remind us of this photographer and their work as the key element. This is a database that we use. We can search through it with keywords. It's organized in a very simple but useful way. So if we have an interest in you, then you end up here. So what are we actually looking for? This is it's an interesting question because we're not necessarily looking for anything absolutely specific, but there are some key elements that, in our viewpoint, runs across all good photography. And that is, we're looking for an integrity of intent in the work, and we're looking for photographers who have something to say through their photography. It may be something very simple. It may be something about photography itself, like, for example, Laura Wolf's photograph that I threw on the screen earlier. But there needs to be some substance there. We're also looking for excellent craftsmanship, which is why I talk a lot about the quality of the print. And the craftsmanship not only comes about through the quality of printing, but it also comes through in the quality of how you're actually working with the medium of photography. I have a particular interest in how photographers work with the frame. Everything that's in that frame should be there for a reason. It's not by chance. Sometimes it can come about by chance if you're a very instinctive photographer, but when it moves to the point of being an actual photograph printed, you know why the photograph is framed as it is. So that's one element of it. And there are many others, but I actually really am interested in the frame, whether it's rectangular, circular, or square. We're also looking for originality. And this is something which, you know, postmodernists might say that it's all been done before. It hasn't, because each of you as an individual hasn't made what you're about to make within the current social, economic, political context, or in the context of contemporary photography. So there's a lot of space for everyone to be original. But with that comes also a very important responsibility on you to also have an understanding of what's being made now and actually what's been made in the past as well. So understanding where your photograph sits in that context. I can't urge people enough to really learn their history of photography. And you're actually really lucky because we've only got 160 odd years of it, unlike painting and sculpture. So, you know, understand the key periods of photography, understand who some of the key photographers work, see where your own practice fits into that. I think it's very important, especially if someone looks at your photography and says, oh, this reminds me of. There's nothing worse for you or disheartening for you as an artist to have your work remind someone of someone else's work. So the originality is really important, and that ownership is where you begin to take that pathway to success. The other things we look for are the narrative and the aesthetic strength. So I've kind of touched on aesthetics in terms of the use of the frame, but the narrative strengths are also really important. And this goes back to the integrity of intent. What are you saying? Is everything in the photograph that you state the photograph is about in your statement actually there? Can the photographs stand alone without you explaining them? And it might be that they'll function in different ways without you explaining them, or without an artist statement, but they do need to function on their own. So that doesn't exactly tell you quite what we're looking for, but those are our guiding principles. And there's one other really important point that is a less tangible asset to attracting our attention, and it's completely and utterly subjective, and that's whether we feel a spark. You know, we find photography magical. We love looking at photographs. We love working as dealers, and we're looking for a spark. And if there's not a spark, then it's quite likely that we're not going to be able to find other people who'll find a spark in it. So we need to feel that. So here are some examples of photographers that we are working with, and I'm going to say a little bit about why they attracted us. This is an Australian artist. Her name is Odette England, and this is a series of work which is really looking at the tradition of the family album, which you may not necessarily pick up immediately. She's interested in how family albums fill gaps of our memories and how we tend to remember our childhoods or our life experiences through photographs that may not necessarily represent what was really happening or what the true feelings of those experiences were. And she relates that also to photography and memory, because quite often the photographs, as I mentioned, they'll fill the gaps of our memory, and we'll think something is one way, but it might have been quite different. Memory and photography are very interrelated. And what she's done is she's also related this notion to the idea of perception, and how what we look at isn't necessarily, we're not necessarily seeing it as it truly is, or is as we see it the way it is, even if in reality it might be different. So she's using as a concept and a framework for the series of photographs the Ishihara test for color blindness. And what she's showing us is that some people see things differently. Now, if we go back to her photograph, you can see how that relates to the work. And it's an interesting concept to work with. It's a relatively simple one, but it's very grounded. The photographs themselves, excuse me, are beautiful to look at. They work on a purely visceral and aesthetic level. They're conceptually strong, and they are masterfully executed. Another artist that we work with is Anthony Crossfield. We met Anthony in, I think it was 2009, at the Rhubarb Festival in Birmingham, England. And I have to say, he opened up his portfolio, and this was actually the first image I saw, and it just jumped out. It really was quite overwhelming. And this is an example of where he showed it at a much smaller scale than he actually exhibits and sells it at. I think it was just a 2024 print. The actual one edition is actually, I think it's 83 inches across. So it's large. And I probably don't have enough time here to talk about it in the amount of depth that it deserves, but basically Anthony trained as a painter, and he stopped painting several years ago, and now he works entirely with photography. But he works with photography as though he were a painter. So his photographs are very staged, as I'm sure you can see. He works with real sets and built sets. And he works with the new technology to bring things into the photograph that weren't there when he made them. And you can see from the figures in the middle that he also, not only does, with the environment, does he create a space that is seamlessly constructed, but with the bodies, he actually leaves a seam of construction. So we know that this morphing and this hybridization of the male form is a construction. He's very interested in the representation of the male nude, and he's trying to represent it in a way that is not about beauty. Quite often, when you look through art history, the male form is represented in a very beautiful way. It's often very perfect, and a lot of examples will show that there's a physical impossibility to these forms. He's interested in showing the bodies with all of their flaws. His inspiration is art history, both specific artists, but also the movements through art history. And he's certainly inspired by Francis Bacon, and you can see that in his work. The title of this piece is actually The Invention of Drawing, and there's a lot of myth and various versions of when drawing was invented. And one of the stories is that there was a young man who was going off to war, and he had his young love, and she wanted to keep some part of him with her, and because she didn't know when he would return. So in the light of the candle, she drew his shape that was a shadow on the wall, and kept a part of him in that way. So for Anthony, what he's done is he's looked at the different versions of this basic story and brought it right up into contemporary art, working with this same idea of drawing the shadow, two people entwined, and really done something quite special with it. If you look carefully at the photograph as well, because he's working with multiple images, you'll see that he actually photographs from multiple viewpoints. So the perspective is all wrong. You don't all get it immediately. You think that there is something a bit odd about the photograph, but the perspective is out. The scale is strange. And for this reason, I love photographs that make me look, that make me read the image, that cause me to scrutinize and not take it for granted. We live in an image-saturated world, and too often we walk past images that we see on billboards, we flick through magazines, we don't really take them in. So artwork that makes me stop and look is the kind of artwork that really attracts my attention. So that's Anthony. I'm just going to check the time. So once we've met somebody, and I'm going to speed up because I realise we're running out of time. I'll go a bit quicker. So once we've met someone, what happens then? We basically sign someone to a contract, and we don't work without contracts. That's very important. One example of, sorry, I've gone ahead of myself, but Lisa Robinson is an artist we work with, and we met her several times over the course of many years at review festivals. She showed her work to lots of people. A lot of people became very familiar with it. She wasn't asking for anything, actually. She was just wanting feedback to share her work with people. And we actually really were impressed by her as a person. We thought she was very professional. We thought the images were fabulous. And it just so happened that the stars aligned, and when she reached the point where her series of photographs called Snowbound was completed, she also managed to be offered a publishing deal, and then we offered her representation in a solo exhibition. It all came together beautifully for her. But she spent a long time on the review circuit sharing her work with people. And she didn't stop there. Once she had representation, not just with us, but other galleries, she actually took 6 months out of her creating time to dedicate to marketing and to making herself available for artist presentations and book signings. And she basically spent 6 months doing not much else than that. She's an absolute delight to work with, and a great example of how a gallery and an artist works together. The second person is Cornelia Hediger. This is a totally different example of how we've met someone and seen their work and how they've come to the gallery. This literally happened in a week, and you may have seen on a previous slide on the list of how we find work that there are chance encounters. This is an example of a chance encounter. We were actually at the Centre for Photography at Woodstock, where Darren was the curator for the Photography Now exhibition in 2008. And in the other room, there was this exhibition by Cornelia. I wandered in, and I have to say, it took my breath away. It was still in very early stages of development, I have to say, but I just could not tear myself away from these photographs. Fortunately, we were able to meet Cornelia, and that same evening I did what I tell everyone not to do, which is I cornered her for a good hour, and we actually found that there was a good amount of synergy between us. And then we invited her to the gallery 1 week later, because whilst there was something that we knew instinctively was great about this artist, we also keep a very cool business head. So she came to the gallery with her portfolio. Both Darren and I looked through it. We had quite a long discussion, and we basically offered her representation, and she accepted. We actually then went on to give her her first solo show about 4 months later. It was our September slot, which is the premiere slot. And in fact, just the exhibition before the one we have now was her second solo show. One of the reasons that we were drawn to this work is, again, it comes back to all of those elements that come together to make a great photograph. She has a really strong narrative structure. She works with the concept of the doppelganger, which is the mythical double other. It's an apparition, quite often the harbinger of bad luck. If you see your own doppelganger, it can mean that death is imminent. So you have this dark undercurrent. She's working with a very intimate, introspective autobiography, which at the same time, although the images are very challenging, are not so autobiographical that someone who doesn't know her or knows what's going on a personal level can't find their way into the work. She works in a very pure way. So each of these 6 images is a complete full-frame photograph. And she works with the vantage point and distance between subject and camera in a way that changes the image and distorts the figures in order to push forward the narrative. So you're always having one figure is quite often subordinate to the other. It's very beautiful work. It's very challenging work, and you know, an incredible artist. She's also someone who I should say is a great example of, there's a lot of talk about whether you need to be great with social media, whether you need to be blogging, whether you need a website, all of these things. Cornelia is basically a very focused artist. She, apart from a few other activities, including a little bit of teaching, she's completely focused on her work. That's what she does. And she doesn't care for any of this, anything else that's really going on. She does have a website now, but she didn't at the time. But she doesn't have a Facebook page. She doesn't engage with Twitter. She doesn't do any of that. We help her by being more of a face, so she doesn't have to do that. Okay, so once you've got representation, what next? Well, it's really just the beginning. And basically it's about collaboration. It's about creative and professional collaboration. And it's a bit like a marriage. Our lives become interdependent, both professionally, creatively, and financially. As gallerists, we basically have 2 clients. One client is our artist, and the other is the collector or purchaser, buyer of artwork. And everything we do is focused upon meeting the needs of our 2 clients. We're a broker between the 2. So what do we offer? I've spoken a bit about what we're looking for from photographers. Basically, what we offer is a platform for exposure, and we offer access through ourselves to people who want to buy the work. It's kind of simple, really. And for our other client, the collector, what we do is we bring to them artwork that through carrying it and exhibiting it, we have validated. And so through their trust in our judgment, we're letting them know that this is good work to purchase, whether it be purchasing it as a one-off for a wall in an apartment, or whether they're a serious collector who has a warehouse full of artwork, whether it's a curator at a museum, whomever it is, we treat the same. And that's basically the two clients that we have. We have many artists and we have many collectors, but it's basically two. So once you're working with a gallery, and certainly with us, we do get involved quite a bit with our gallery artists in that we do work very closely with them on their editioning and pricing. We work very closely with them in giving feedback on work in progress. And we're a very personable team in that way. We don't have so many artists that we really lose track of anybody and what they're doing. Although sometimes if someone is a more prolific producer than another, we can be kept on our toes quite a lot as well. I'm actually going to just move ahead because there are some points here that I'm going to talk about in more detail. The branding of the gallery is very important. And whilst I said to you earlier that I really like people to really invest in their portfolio and their photographing because you're a photographer, it is important to think about your brand and how people perceive you. And it's the same for us. You'll see here that I'm going through some images of the face of postcards. We still work with traditional media at the gallery. We do a postcard for every exhibition that we do. These are sent out to our clients. They're also sent out to the press. And they're also available in the gallery for people to take away. Quite often people hold on to them, come back with a card and say, I came to your gallery and I saw this and I'd like to look at some photographs now. You'll see through the images that there's always an emphasis on showcasing the photograph. Our logo is always there so people know where to come, but the emphasis is always on the artwork itself. The branding is consistent, but the photograph is always of the utmost importance. Likewise, across everything else that we produce, I'm just going to take you through some images that relate to the current exhibition, Proposition 1 by Max de Esteban, and show you some of the materials that we actually produce. So this is a media release. It's sent out digitally, and we also produce a paper copy. And the paper copy, both the digital and the paper copy, is sent out to press and to critics. In the gallery, we have a similar document, but this time it's pitched towards visitors to the gallery. So we have pricing information on the work, a little less information about the photographs, a little less bio information. It's an easy, fairly easy to read document that people can take away. You'll see that across these, the branding is consistent along with how we work with the postcards, and likewise with the price list. We carry that all the way across. We don't do a simple Word document. We put a lot of time into these layouts. And again, the branding translates across to our website. And we've just started a blog, which is a new thing. And you'll see from our blog archive that there aren't very many posts on that yet. But again, the branding is very consistent. We try to maintain the same voice across everything that we put out. Whilst we're doing that, it's really important that our photographers understand that their own brand is strong and that they do their part as well to promote themselves and to present their work in the most professional manner that's possible. Not everyone has the same resources, but a good example to look at is the website of Simon Roberts. And you can see his address there, simonroberts.com. He actually produces a separate website or a separate section for each of his projects, and there's a wealth of information there. We do work with social media. but we try not to allow it to take up too much of our time. The one thing that we find very valuable that we always chase is editorial, whether it be reviews of festivals or whether it's getting editors interested in our photographers for features and interviews. This kind of coverage usually results in the phone ringing and people either wanting to purchase work or inquiring about it. So then there is a lot of talk about pricing and editioning. There isn't actually one answer, is what I'm going to tell you, okay? And the reason for that is there are a whole bunch of different variables that come into play when you're looking at the pricing and editioning of your work. Firstly, there are some different models that you can follow. A flat structure, which is where you have one price across all of your photographs, no matter how many you've sold before, or how, say you have 10 photographs, number 10 is the same price as number 1. That's one structure and that's fine. Another structure is what's called the stepped pricing system, where as you sell your work, the price goes up. That also works fine. Open editions might also be appropriate. With fine art photographs, it is actually the norm to edition your work, but maybe you don't want to. And that's fine, but it's going to reflect in the price. And the pricing relates to scarcity, and it also relates to scale. But on a basic level, the larger your edition, the lower your pricing. The lower your editions, the higher the price. Not only because with a smaller edition it becomes scarcer, there are less of them, so you can command a higher price, but also presumably you want to earn an income. And if you're only selling 3, then you want to earn a certain amount. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. So there's also a lot of talk about, certainly in the context of portfolios, should I print it to the best quality or should I do something cheaper to show you? There's also some questions around this same subject with regard to exhibitions. And I will actually say, in no uncertain terms, that unless you're in a very unique situation, that for an exhibition you should print your work to the highest standard in the way and the manner that you expect to sell the work. There's a lot of investment put into mounting an exhibition. Our artists, for example, will actually cover the costs of their production, their mounting and their framing. As their dealers, we make a promise to do our best to sell off the wall, but we can't do that if it's not of the right standard. Furthermore, as a gallery, our reputation and our brand is reflected in the quality of the exhibitions that we curate. So we will not show substandard work. And since you invest so much into that, you want to get that money back. This is just a really quick whiz through some figures because I'm not sure if everyone is fully aware of what something might cost. So this is actually, actually a bit of a conservative estimate because I did this afternoon. This relates to the current show that we have. We have 14 pieces on the wall. In terms of the framed artwork value, it's $27,170, thereabouts. The photographs without the frames is a value of $22,500. When we sell work off the wall framed, our artist gets 100% back on their mounting and framing. We only make the commission quite rightly on the photographs. So for us, our potential income is just over $11,000. Not figured into this, the costs at the top include only the direct cost to putting that exhibition on. Okay, they don't cover other costs like time, like salaries. And when I say that this is conservative, I've actually only allocated a portion of the total gallery cost because only a portion of the gallery of the exhibition is taking up, the exhibition's only taking up a portion of the gallery space. So I've proportionately reduced costs in that respect. So you can see here that even before we take into consideration, say, taking a client out for dinner, you working with an art shipper to take work across town for a presentation of a portfolio, or maybe sometimes people actually want a car service to come over to the gallery to see the work. Without any of that, without salaries, break even, we need to sell at least 10 photographs. So you can see how the quality of the work is really important. When it comes down to the business of the image, it really is, it comes down to, will this work sell or won't it? And it has to. Otherwise it's a financially losing exhibition. So then we also want to turn this same concept to art fairs. I know that there's, it's really sexy to be with a gallery that goes to art fairs. A lot of artists want their work shown at art fairs, and that's understandable because there are a lot of collectors who actually attend them. The curators from the museums attend. But here's a little bit of a reality check for a gallery, especially one such as ourselves, who are working with mostly emerging photographers, and ourselves being a gallery that is actually still relatively new. You can read the figures for yourselves, and again, these are conservative estimates. This is probably way at the low end of the scale, but over a 3 or 4 day period, with an average price point of $3,000, 14 pieces of artwork need to be sold. And that's just to break even on the direct costs relating to that fair. So that's a reality. So if you're a photographer and you're going to an art fair, and if you are thinking that you can go to a gallery's booth and try and present your work to them, they're not going to be very happy because they're there to sell. And so, you know, this is, I think throwing those figures up might give you a little bit of a reality check on that. And it takes me back to what I said earlier about thinking about the bigger picture. Do you remember my little sparkly bigger picture? Mm-hmm. I hope that you are sitting there with a bit of a spark and you have a better insight into the bigger picture. Thank you so much. So the question is, once someone has met someone like me, what is the best way to follow up later? And, you know, there are different ways you can do that. For ourselves, we will often let someone know if we want them to follow up with us. And if you do follow up without having that kind of indication from someone, as a general rule, I advise people to simply follow up when you have something to share, some really good news that you want to impart to that person. So don't put me on your monthly newsletter. I don't really want to receive it. But if 6 months down the line you've been offered this great exhibition in a festival on the other side of the world, I'd really like to hear about it. You can either just send a normal email and say, hey, I'm in this exhibition, or I've got a new body of work, let me know if you're interested in seeing it, or I've got a new body of work, it's now posted to my website, take a look and let me know if you're interested.
So the link of the website will be fine.
Yeah. But it's a good idea to remind people like myself where we met you. Mm-hmm. Because as you can imagine, even at something like Photo Fest, I sit in front of 56 people and I'm not going to remember everybody. But if you can always reintroduce yourself by saying, we met at whatever event, you said it was okay to let you know any news, and this is my news. You may not get a response, but we respond in that we'll take a look, yeah. And if we feel we want to email back, we will, but sometimes we don't. But quite often there is this idea that a photographer is putting their heart and soul into the work. They spend a lot of time making it. There's the production costs, etc. And that it seems a bit odd that a dealer takes a 50% commission on a sale. And what those two figures are, and again, they're rounded off and they don't include absolutely everything. But I actually went through quite a while ago now, and actually added up all the costs that are involved for a photographer and the gallery to put on an exhibition. And they actually turn out to be pretty much the same.
Not the cost of making the work.
Yeah, printing, mounting, framing. And then with the gallery, there's the real estate, which is the exhibition area. Yeah, there's the insurance, the marketing, postcards, press releases.
Right.
We do traditional mail-outs. There's the reception. There's quite often a dinner where you host the artist. The two top figures are basically the investment for both parties. Yeah. The framed artwork value is the mounted framed photographs. The unframed artwork, the reason why that's there is because we earn a commission just on the photographs. The artist gets back 100% of their cost of mounting and framing. Yeah? Yeah. It is. Well, it's kind of simple, but not, yeah. The reason I actually wanted to put this up is because I want to really underwrite that the partnership between a dealer and a photography is interdependent, and it's 50-50. It's about both parties entering into a business relationship, and because we're dealing with art, it's a creative relationship as well, but it's equal. And the investment we're making to each other is very equal. You know, as most photographers don't necessarily earn their entire income from their fine art. It would be great if they did, but that sometimes there's another way to actually supplement on income on sales. On my income, apart from some consulting and then circumstances like this, is only from print sales. My sole income is from selling photographs. That's it. And so our livelihoods are actually completely, inextricably linked. And this is just a very, very quick and simple way to demonstrate that. If we felt that there's a vision behind the work, and if we felt that there's potential in the work, then we would work with them to find a way to bring that level up. If we were really interested, it might be that the advice to the photographer is that maybe you shouldn't be printing your own work. You know, if you don't have those skills, then work with a skilled printer as one example of how to deal with it. I should say that, you know, Simon Roberts, whose work we showed in our inaugural exhibition, when we first met him, his motherland photographs were basically pretty much a loose bunch of images in a photographic box. But you could see the potential. Very shortly afterwards, they were a lot more than that. But you could see the strength of the work in that immediately.
Thank you very much, Debra.
Thank you.